The air inside the executive office was heavy, with the fragrance of expensive espresso and artificial plants. I sat across from Julian Vance, the 30-something chief executive officer who wore designer sneakers that cost more than my first car and possessed a smile that did not quite reach his cold, dead eyes. He was leaning back in his leather chair, a chair he did not know how to adjust properly, so he always looked like a toddler trapped in a spacecraft. He tapped a luxury fountain pen against his teeth, creating a slow, rhythmic click. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a time bomb that did not know it was already ticking down to an explosion. Sylvia, Julian started, using that patronizing tone reserved for explaining cryptocurrency to the elderly. We are pivoting. We are moving toward a leaner, more agile methodology. We are trimming the excess weight to let the muscle breathe. The board and I, well, mostly I because I am steering this ship, have been looking at the equity pool. Frankly, the legacy options, the ones my father handed out like candy when we started, clogging the cap table. They are dead weight, Sylvia, and we are a family here. Families make sacrifices for the greater good. Family, I repeated. The word tasted like battery acid in my mouth. Exactly, Julian beamed, thinking he had successfully landed the plane. So, we are restructuring your advisory options. They are being canceled effective immediately. We are issuing new grants to the engineering team. The guy's actually building the future, you know. But hey, we are keeping you on salary for the transition period. We are not monsters. He pushed a document toward me. It was a single-page notice of equity forfeiture printed on heavy bond paper to make it look official. He expected me to cry, or scream, or throw the wooden coaster sitting on his desk. He was braced for a hysterical reaction from a senior governance lady. He did not know who I was. He saw Sylvia, the woman who sat in the back of meetings taking notes, the woman who quietly reminded people about compliance training and updated the employee handbook. He saw a fixture like the water cooler or the printer that always jammed. He did not see the architect. Julian had spent the last 2 years systematically replacing the old guard with young compliant assistants who laughed at his terrible jokes and agreed with every slide in his presentations. He had hired consultants from expensive firms, paying them massive fees to tell him what his father already knew for free. He wanted to look like the visionary chief executive officers on the covers of technology magazines. He wanted the prestige without the struggle, the title without the accountability. I did not pick up the pen. I did not touch the paper. I just folded my hands in my lap, placing one thumb over the other, pressing down until the nail turned white. "Is that all, Julian?" I asked. My voice was steady and flat, the audio equivalent of a flatlining heart monitor. He blinked, confused by the complete lack of drama. "Oh yeah, I mean human resources will send you the updated compensation package. Minus the equity. But Sylvia, really thank you for being understanding. It is just business." "Just business," I echoed. I stood up, my knees popping in the quiet room. I smoothed the skirt of my charcoal suit, a suit I bought 10 years ago when his father, Robert, begged me to save his chaotic startup from a regulatory audit. I looked around the room. I saw the whiteboard covered in buzzwords like synergy and disruption. I saw the photo of Julian on a yacht holding a bottle of champagne, looking like the poster child for unearned confidence. "I will get back to work then," I said. I walked out. I did not slam the glass door. I closed it softly with a click that sounded like a lock engaging. As I walked back to my desk, a small cubicle tucked away near the server room, far from the open-plan collaboration zones, where the young staff drank nitro brew coffee. I felt a cold metallic taste of absolute clarity. Julian thought he had just cut off a withered limb. He thought he had cleared the capitalization table for his big acquisition. He thought he was the smartest man in the room because he spoke the loudest. He had no idea that he had just tried to evict the landlord. I sat down at my desk, unlocked my computer, and opened a folder labeled Archive nested inside 3 other folders labeled Tax Receipts. I was not going to scream. I was not going to sue, not yet. I was going to wait because Julian had forgotten the first rule of corporate governance. Read the bylaws. Read the amendments. Read the fine print his father signed when the company was 3 days away from bankruptcy and could not make payroll. He wanted to play family. We could play family. We could play the part where the matriarch reminds the spoiled children exactly who owns the house. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my glasses. The cursor blinked. Let the games begin. For the first time in years, I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf watching a sheep lock itself inside the slaughterhouse to understand why Julian's power play was roughly as intelligent as sticking a fork into a toaster. You have to go back to a time before the polished concrete floors and the espresso machines. You have to go back to when this company was 5 people in a basement in Queens that smelled like mildew and desperation. It was 12 years ago. Robert Vance, the founder and Julian's father, called me at 3 in the morning. I was working at a mid-tier legal firm, billing long hours and dying slowly inside one document review at a time. Sylvia, Robert had rasped, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. I am finished. The regulators are sniffing around our early funding round. The investors are pulling their term sheets. I cannot pay the lawyers. I cannot pay the staff. I cannot pay anyone. I should have hung up the phone. I should have gone back to sleep and let Robert's dream die. But Robert possessed a chaotic magnetic energy. He was a disaster, but he was a brilliant disaster. I am coming over, I told him. When I arrived, the office looked like a crime scene where the murder weapon was bureaucracy. Papers were scattered everywhere, including unopened notices from the tax authorities. Robert was sitting on the floor, surrounded by empty takeout containers, looking like a man who had stared into the abyss. In the corner sat Julian. He was 22 then, an intern. He was wearing oversized headphones and playing games on his phone, completely oblivious to the fact that his inheritance was currently swirling down the drain. He looked up, gave a vague nod, and went back to his screen. That was the dynamic. Robert panicked, Julian ignored, and I fixed. The regulators were looking at how we had classified our early seed investments, and the state was ready to dissolve our charter for unpaid taxes and missing filings. I spent 4 nights in a row in that damp basement, surrounded by cardboard boxes, reconstructing our capitalization ledger on a yellow legal pad because the digital files were a corrupted mess. I negotiated payment plans with 3 different state revenue departments and convinced our main server provider not to shut down our hosting for non-payment. For 6 months, I did not sleep. I lived on vending machine coffee and sheer spite. I rebuilt their corporate structure from the ground up. I standardized the contracts, fought the auditors, and renegotiated debt with creditors. I was the janitor of their legal mess, scrubbing the grime off the ledger until it shined. When the dust settled, the company was saved, but there was no cash. Robert sat me down on a folding chair in the empty office. "Sylvia, I cannot pay your invoices. I have nothing," he admitted. "I know, Robert," I said. I was exhausted. My hair was a mess, and I had been wearing the same blouse for 2 days. "But I can give you this," he said, sliding a document across the table. It was a convertible advisory agreement, a strange hybrid of a contract. It granted me advisory shares, specifically Class B, but Robert had insisted on adding a loyalty clause, a poison pill. If the company failed to declare and pay dividends for 24 consecutive months, or if the board of directors failed to hold a certified meeting with a proper quorum for a full fiscal year, these shares would convert. "Convert to what?" I asked, squinting at the fine print. "Voting stock," Robert whispered. "Supervoting stock with a 10-to-1 ratio. It is a defense mechanism, Sylvia. If I ever lose control, or if the vultures try to take the company and stop paying us, this kicks in. You become the ultimate safeguard." I looked at Julian in the corner, still uselessly tapping his phone screen. Then I looked at Robert, who was trusting me to be the keeper of the keys. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you are the only one who actually reads the paperwork." Robert replied. I signed the agreement, and Robert signed it. We notarized it right there with a stamp I kept in my purse. I filed the original in the secure archives and kept a personal copy in my fireproof safe at home. Years passed, and the company grew. Robert got old and tired, eventually stepping back into a chairman emeritus role, which basically meant he played golf and pretended not to notice his son turning the office into a playground. Julian took over as chief executive officer. Julian, who never read anything longer than a message on social media. Julian, who treated me like the office furniture. Julian, who saw my title of governance specialist and assumed it meant a secretary. He did not know about the clause. He never dug into the historic filings. He only cared about the new valuation metrics, but the clock had been ticking. The first condition was the unpaid dividends. The company had never paid a single dividend. They reinvested everything into marketing and Julian's travel expenses. That was 12 years of non-payment. The second condition was the board inactivity. Julian hated board meetings, thinking they stifled innovation. He had replaced formal board meetings with casual retreats in ski resorts. Legally, those did not count. There had not been a certified board meeting with recorded minutes in 3 years. The conversion had happened silently and automatically 3 years ago. According to the document in my safe, I did not just have options. I held 52.4% of the voting power of the entire company. Julian was walking around like a king, unaware that the tenant had bought the building. Invisibility is a slow process. It does not happen overnight. It is like soil erosion, eating away at your presence until you are gone. First, they stop inviting you to the strategic lunches. Then you fall off the email threads for the major projects. Then they move your desk. 6 months before Julian called me into his office. To cancel my options, they moved me. I used to sit next to the executive suite, a location where I could hear the hum of decisions being made. Then, one Monday morning, I arrived to find my files packed in boxes. We are creating a collaboration zone for the developers. The office manager, Chloe, told me. She was 22 and communicated primarily in digital icons. So, we moved you to the annex. It is quieter, which is better for whatever it is you do. The annex was a storage closet near the server racks. It was cold and hummed constantly with the sound of cooling fans. It was where they put things they did not want to look at, including broken chairs, old banners, and me. I became a ghost. I would walk down the hallway to get water, and people would look right through me. New employees did not even know my name. One afternoon, a young man named Hunter stopped me near the elevator. He was wearing a vest over a t-shirt and holding a skateboard. He was our new vice president of brand evangelism. Hunter had been hired because his father was a managing partner at one of the venture capital firms that backed our early funding rounds. His job was to post inspirational quotes on social media and organize company happy hours, for which he was paid a substantial salary. He did not know what Delaware corporate governance meant, nor did he care. He was the epitome of the new culture Julian had imported, where style was valued over substance, and self-promotion was considered a core competency. "Hey," Hunter said, snapping his fingers. "You are in human resources, right? The toilet on the 4th floor is clogged. Someone tried to flush a salad. Can you get a plunger?" I stared at him. I was wearing a silk blouse and holding a binder containing the details of our corporate tax structure. "I am in governance, Hunter," I replied, my voice cold. "Right, governance, operations, same thing," he laughed, already looking down at his phone. "Just get a plunger. It smells bad in there." I did not get a plunger. I went back to my desk and added his name to my list of future adjustments. But invisibility had a major perk. When people think you are furniture, they talk freely in front of you. They leave sensitive files on the printer. They forget you have administrative access to the shared network because they assume you do not know how to navigate the system. That was how I discovered the numbers. Julian was preparing for the sale, the big exit. The rumors were true. A massive conglomerate named Omnicorp was planning a $400 million acquisition. Our earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization needed to look spectacular, but they were not. The growth had slowed, and the margins were shrinking. So Julian was getting creative with the bookkeeping. I watched the files update in real time on the server. I saw the adjusted spreadsheets. They were moving operating expenses into capital expenditures to artificially inflate profits. They were counting projected revenue from contracts that had not been signed as recognized revenue. It was a classic case of corporate fraud, the kind of deception that works for a quarter until a real auditor looks under the hood. I sat in my cold corner by the servers, wrapped in a scarf, watching the digital trail of lies grow. "You are getting sloppy, Julian," I whispered to the screen. He was cutting corners on compliance, ignoring data privacy regulations, and skipping board approvals for major expenses. Under Delaware law, these transactions required formal board consent, which meant they needed my signature to certify the resolutions. Julian simply ignored the rules, believing his title gave him absolute authority. Every day, I saved a copy of the evidence. I archived every altered invoice, every email thread where he told the financial officers to make the numbers work, or he would find someone who could. I built a comprehensive dossier. The cost of my invisibility was high. My professional identity was erased, and I was treated like the crazy lady in the basement. But the return on my investment was going to be substantial. While they were playing tennis and drinking beer upstairs, planning how to spend their future millions, I was constructing a coffin, nail by nail, document by document. They thought I was obsolete, but in a company built on smoke and mirrors, the person who holds the flashlight is the most dangerous person in the building. I checked the time. It was 5:30 on a Friday. The office was getting loud. I could hear the bass from the music thumping through the ceiling. I packed my bag, took my external hard drive, and walked out. Chloe waved without looking up from her screen. "Have a good weekend," she said. "I will," I replied, and I meant it. This weekend I was going to open my safe. My apartment on the Upper West Side is quiet. It smells of beeswax and old paper. There are no beanbag chairs, and there is no neon signage encouraging me to work harder. There is only order. That Friday night, after Julian had informed me that my options were canceled, I did not cry. I made a pot of strong black tea, put on my reading glasses, and knelt before the safe in my bedroom closet. The dial spun with a heavy, satisfying click. Left to 32, right to 18, left to 4. The heavy door swung open. The safe was a heavy green steel box that had belonged to my grandfather. It was fireproof and weighed over 80 pounds. I had carried it with me through 3 apartment moves, refusing to let the movers touch it. It was my personal anchor in a city that was constantly changing. I sat on the floor, the cold hardwood cooling my legs, and slowly turned the dial. Inside, stacked next to my birth certificate, was the document. I carried the file to my dining room table, spreading the pages under the warm light of the chandelier. I turned to page 14, clause 7.2. I ran my finger over the text, reciting the words I had memorized a decade ago. The clause stated that if the company failed to declare and pay dividends on any class of stock for 24 consecutive months, or if the board of directors failed to convene a certified meeting for 12 consecutive months, my Class B advisory shares would automatically convert into super voting shares at a ratio of 10-1. I grabbed a calculator to confirm the math. The company had 10 million outstanding shares. Julian held 4,400,000. The venture capital investors held another 4,400,000. The employee pool, which Julian was currently trying to gut, held 1 million. I held 1 million, but with the conversion clause activated, my 1 million shares now carried the voting weight of 10 million. The total voting pool was 19 million votes, and I held 10 million of them, giving me 52.6% of the voting power. Julian could fire me as an employee, but he could not cancel stock that had already converted into a controlling interest. He could not remove me as a shareholder without a vote, and he could not win a vote because I controlled the outcome. For 3 years, I had been the silent owner of the company. I had let Julian play chief executive officer, hoping he would eventually learn to respect the business. But he had broken the rules, and now I would enforce the agreement. I pulled out a legal pad and began drafting a motion to intervene. I needed to time this perfectly. If I revealed my hand too early, Julian might try to delay the deal or tie me up in litigation using company funds. I had to wait until the moment of maximum leverage, when the deal was on the line and the buyers were ready to sign. The acquisition was scheduled for next Thursday morning. On Tuesday, Julian hosted a meeting with the investors to celebrate. I was not invited, but I walked in holding a tray of water bottles to observe. "Sylvia," Julian said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "Just set those down. Thanks." He turned back to the investors, including a man named Garrett. "The cap table is clean. We have retired the legacy options, and my father is on board. He is in Florida and just wants the check. I have his proxy." I arranged the bottles neatly, realizing Julian was lying. "Robert never gave proxies." "Excellent," Garrett said. "Because the Omnicorp lawyers are thorough. If they find any discrepancies, they will reduce the valuation immediately." "There are no issues," Julian insisted. "We run a clean operation. I walked out of the room, feeling my phone vibrate. It was a text from Robert, asking why I was leaving. I called him and explained the situation. Robert Vance was not just a retired founder. He was a proud engineer who had designed the original manufacturing equipment. He had watched Julian turn his legacy into a marketing machine, but he had stayed silent, believing that a founder should step aside and let the next generation lead. He had tolerated the yacht trips and the media profiles, but he would not tolerate fraud. Falsifying a capitalization table to secure a sale was not just a breach of fiduciary duty, it was a criminal act under corporate regulations. The idiot, Robert muttered over the phone. He thinks that if he ignores the agreement, it ceases to exist. He is going to sign a purchase contract based on a falsified cap table. That is fraud. I need you in New York on Thursday, I told him, and bring your copy of the agreement. I will be there, Robert said. Let us save the company. On Wednesday, I logged into the digital data room using my credentials. I downloaded the cap table Julian had uploaded. Row 42 showed my shares as terminated. This was a clear violation of federal securities laws, specifically Section 10 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and California Penal Code Section 471. He was actively concealing a controlling interest. Later that afternoon, the buyer's counsel, Eleanor Thorne, requested the original advisor agreements from 2010. Julian uploaded a document that omitted my agreement entirely. The trap was set, and Julian had walked right into it. On Thursday morning, the rain was pouring over Manhattan, turning the sky the color of lead. I stood in the lobby of our office building at 10 minutes before 8, wearing a sharp navy suit. Robert Vance walked through the revolving doors on time. He looked older, walking with a cane, but his eyes were sharp. Sylvia, he nodded. We were not people who hugged, we were war partners. Robert, I replied. Do you have the documents? He tapped his leather briefcase. I have my copy. We took the elevator to the penthouse. The office had been decorated with fresh flowers, and champagne was cooling on ice. Julian was standing near the window, adjusting his tie. When he saw Robert, his face lit up. Dad, you made it, Julian said, rushing over. This is the biggest day of our lives. Then he saw me standing behind his father and his smile vanished. Sylvia, I thought you were clearing out your desk today. We need this floor clear of non-essential personnel before the buyers arrive. Robert leaned on his cane. Julian, did you review the cap table with Sylvia? Dad, please. Julian sighed. Waving his hand, the legal team signed off. Do not micromanage me. This is my deal. I built this value. You polished the value, Robert corrected. You did not build the foundation. Julian ignored him and walked into the conference room. A few minutes later, the Omnicorp team arrived. 6 lawyers in dark suits sat on one side of the large marble table. Julian sat on the other side, flanked by Douglas, our young general counsel. Robert and I stood near the door. Eleanor Thorne, the lead partner for the buyers, opened her binder. We have reviewed the disclosures, she began, her voice crisp. The funds are ready to be wired. However, we have one final issue regarding the cap table. We ran a search of the corporate filings this morning and found a discrepancy. There is a Class B convertible instrument mentioned in the historic audits that is not listed in your current ledger. We need the signed release from the holder. Julian laughed nervously. That is ancient history. It was just an advisory agreement for an old employee, and it was canceled, right, Douglas? Douglas shifted in his seat, looking terrified. Yes, it was retired. Eleanor looked over her glasses. Do you have the signed release? If this instrument converted, it is equity, not an option. Without a release, we cannot proceed. The room went completely silent. Who is the holder? Eleanor asked. I took a step forward, my heels clicking on the floor. That would be me, I said. Julian turned around, his face turning red. Sylvia, what are you doing? Get out of this room. I walked to the table and placed my documents in front of Eleanor. I have not signed a release. This is the original agreement, along with the bank records showing that no dividends were paid for 12 years and the records proving that no board meetings were held for 3 years. Under Clause 7.2, these shares converted to super voting stock. I hold 52.6% of the voting power. Eleanor scanned the papers, then looked at Robert. Is this correct, Mr. Vance? It is correct, Robert said. She owns the controlling interest. Julian stood up shouting, "This is ridiculous. She is a secretary. She does not own anything." "Sit down, Julian," Robert said. "She owns the company." Eleanor closed her binder and looked at Julian. It appears the person sitting in the chief executive officer's chair does not have the authority to sell this business. She turned to me. "Sylvia, why are we talking to him?" "I have no idea," I replied. "Julian, you were in my seat." Julian looked around the room, but the investors were staring at their phones, and Douglas was looking at the floor. Realizing he had lost, Julian grabbed his folder and stormed out of the room, slamming the door. I sat down in the chair at the head of the table. "I apologize for the confusion," I told Eleanor. "The former management did not understand the corporate structure. The valuation is fair, and I am prepared to sign the shareholder consent form to approve the sale." "And the proceeds?" Eleanor asked. "We will adjust the distribution," I said. "The employee option pool that Julian tried to cancel will be fully reinstated. The staff will get their payouts first." Eleanor smiled. "We can work with that." We spent the next 4 hours finalizing the contract. I knew every detail of the operations, so we did not need Douglas. At 1 in the afternoon, we signed the papers, and the wire transfer was initiated. I walked Robert to the elevator. "You did well, Sylvia," he said. "I just read the fine print." "Robert," I replied. I returned to the office and walked into the executive suite. I saw the forfeiture notice Julian had left on the desk. I picked it up and ran it through the shredder. Then I sat in the leather chair, adjusted the support so it fit me perfectly, and opened my laptop. I sent an email to the entire company. The subject line read, "Update regarding leadership and acquisition." To all staff, I wrote, "The acquisition is complete. Your jobs are safe and your stock options are fully vested. We are a family here, and this time, Mom is in charge. Get back to work." I closed my laptop and looked out at the city. The rain had stopped and the sun was shining. Real power does not need to shout, it simply asserts itself.